They handed me a folder like I was a stranger sitting across from a loan officer, not their mother, not the woman who had spent 31 years turning that house into something worth passing down. My son set it on the kitchen table. My kitchen table, the one with the burn mark near the left corner where he'd set a hot pan as a teenager and we'd laughed about it for years. He didn't laugh now. He folded his hands and said, "Mom, we've already talked to a realtor. It just makes more sense for everyone." I looked at my daughter-in-law. She was studying the window. I didn't say anything. I picked up the folder, looked at the first page, set it back down, and asked if anyone wanted coffee. Nobody wanted coffee. They left 40 minutes later with the folder still on the table and a timeline they'd printed out on the back page. 30 days to decide. As if 30 days could undo 31 years. As if a timeline was something you handed to the woman who'd taught you to tie your shoes in that same hallway, in that same house, in that same life they were now quietly trying to dismantle, while I stood in my kitchen and offered them coffee they didn't want. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window, the one that looks out over the backyard, where the oak tree my husband planted the year our son was born still stands wider than any of us expected it to grow. Frank would have known what to say. He would have leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and said something quiet and exact that ended the conversation without starting a war. But Frank had been gone for 6 years, and I had spent those 6 years learning how to end conversations alone. The next morning I found a business card tucked under the folder. The realtor's name was printed in navy blue. Beneath it, in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, "Already scheduled a walkthrough for Thursday." I put the card in my cardigan pocket. Then I went to the roll-out drawer beneath the kitchen island, the one nobody ever opens, except me, and I pulled out my own folder. The one with my name on it, the one with the deed. The house was mine. Had been mine since Frank passed. My name, only my name, on every document that mattered. I called my neighbor Vivian that afternoon. She'd known me since the kids were young, since Frank and I used to have people over on Saturday nights, and the neighborhood still felt like a neighborhood. "I need a favor," I said. "Can you check on the garden while I'm away?" She asked where I was going. "I'll tell you when I figure it out," I said, which wasn't entirely true. I had already figured it out. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. Because once you say something out loud to someone like Vivian, it becomes real, and I wanted to hold it close for another hour or two. I'd never been to New Mexico. Frank always wanted to go. He had a photograph torn from a magazine pinned above his desk in the study red canyon walls, a pale sky, the kind of quiet that looks loud in pictures. He'd say, "Eleanor, one of these years." And then the years pass the way they do when you're raising someone and building something and keeping everything running. And one of these years became one of these days. And then just something we didn't talk about anymore. I booked one seat on a flight to Albuquerque. Window. I hadn't flown in 11 years. I packed the way Frank used to tease me for packing deliberately, one item at a time, each thing earning its place in the bag. My good walking shoes. 3 blouses, 2 of which were colors I used to wear before everything I owned became beige. My reading glasses and a spare. The small jade earrings Frank gave me on our 25th anniversary that I wore exactly twice since the funeral because I never felt like I deserved them on an ordinary day. I decided that day was not going to be ordinary. Thursday came and went. I was somewhere over Texas when my daughter-in-law sent the first message. "The realtor is here. Where are you?" I turned my phone face down on the tray table and watched the clouds. Albuquerque greeted me with warmth I hadn't expected. Not just the temperature, though the air was dry and bright in a way that made my lungs feel new, but something about the light. It landed differently there. More honest, maybe. Less apologetic. I had reserved a room at a small inn near Old Town, run by a woman named Patricia, who handed me a key on a beaded cord and told me breakfast was at 8, but she'd leave something out if I came down early. The room had terracotta floors and a window that faced an apricot tree just beginning to blossom. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long time. My phone had 17 notifications. I opened exactly one from my granddaughter, Sophie. She was 17, a junior, the kind of girl who noticed things adults had stopped bothering to notice. Her message said only, "Grandma, are you okay? Mom's being weird." I typed back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm in New Mexico." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, wait, what? I smiled for the first time in 4 days. That evening, I walked through Old Town as the sun came down behind the mountains and turned everything amber. There were artists selling work along the plaza, an old man playing guitar near the fountain, a child chasing a dog around the base of the church. I bought a small painting, a mesa at dusk, ochre and violet, from a woman about my age who said she'd painted it from a spot she visited every year on her birthday. "Is it far?" I asked. She wrote the directions on the back of a receipt and handed it to me without being asked. That was the kind of place it was. I ate dinner alone at a restaurant with open doors and a menu that didn't apologize for being simple. Red chile enchiladas, iced tea, a piece of sopapilla with honey that I ate slowly because there was nowhere I had to be and no one waiting on an update from me. My son called at 9:15. I watched his name light up the screen and did not answer. Not from cruelty. I simply did not have the words yet, and I had spent enough of my life offering words I hadn't finished thinking. In the morning, I was up before Patricia left the breakfast out. I took my coffee to the courtyard and sat with it while the apricot tree did what apricot trees do in early light. I wasn't used to sitting still without a list attached to it. Every quiet moment in that house for the last 6 years had been borrowed something to be interrupted by a phone call, a request, a need I was already filling before it was fully spoken. My son had my number memorized the way children memorize the combination to a lockbox. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply. I drove out to the mesa that afternoon. The directions from the painter took me down a road that narrowed to gravel, then to dirt, then to something that was more suggestion than road, and then I stopped the car at a ridge and got out and stood there. I understood why Frank had kept that photograph. It wasn't beautiful the way things are beautiful when someone tells you to look at them. It was beautiful the way breathing is necessary, quiet, completely indifferent to whether you appreciated it or not. The canyon walls were exactly the red they looked in pictures, but deeper, older. The sky was the kind of blue that makes other blues seem like they were practicing. I stood there long enough that a hawk circled twice and lost interest in me. I cried. Not dramatically, just the kind of crying that happens when something you forgot you were carrying finally gets put down. I almost didn't notice the woman sitting on a flat rock about 20 yards to my left, a sketch pad open across her knees. She was somewhere near my age, gray hair cropped short, wearing a hat with a wide brim and paint-stained linen pants. She didn't look up when I arrived or when I cried. She just drew. After a while, she said, without looking, "First time?" "Yes," I said. "You picked a good day for it." Her name was Constance. Retired librarian from Portland, traveling alone, had been coming to the Southwest every spring for 12 years since her husband decided he preferred staying home to going anywhere. Not divorced, just, she said, separately contented. She had a dry wit she wielded the way some people use a good knife efficiently, without ceremony. We walked back to the road together. She'd parked 100 yards behind me. When we reached my car, she squinted at the rental sticker and said, "You don't seem like the kind of woman who rents a compact." "I'm usually not," I said. "I'm usually the kind of woman who stays home." She nodded slowly. "And how's that going?" I didn't answer. She seemed to understand that was an answer. We had dinner that night at a place she knew in a neighborhood that didn't appear in any of the tourism materials I'd found online. The kind of restaurant that earns its reputation entirely by word of mouth and doesn't need the words to be many. She ordered for both of us in fluent confidence, recommending the pozole and overriding my instinct to order something smaller. She talked about her students, the ones she'd stayed in touch with for decades, the ones who still sent her letters. I told her about the oak tree, about Frank, about the folder on the kitchen table with the timeline printed on the back page. She set down her fork. "And they thought you'd sign it." They gave me 30 days, I said. She was quiet a moment. How many days have they lived in that house? Zero, I thought. They had never lived in that house. It was always mine and Frank's, and then just mine. They visited. They used the good dishes on holidays and left their coats on the chair by the front door, and sometimes let the kids sleep over in the room that used to be my son's, the one with the glow-in-the-dark stars still on the ceiling that nobody had ever quite gotten around to peeling off. That's what I thought, Constance said, and picked up her fork again. My phone was busy while we ate. I could feel it buzzing against the table the way a trapped thing buzzes against a jar. I left it face down. Constance didn't mention it. She had, I would later learn, very finely calibrated instincts for when to speak and when to simply let something be. The missed calls had stacked up by the time I returned to the inn. 11 from my son, 4 from my daughter-in-law, 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I listened to the voicemail, to be the realtor, cheerfully explaining he'd rescheduled for Saturday and hoped that would be more convenient. I sat on the terrace in the dark and typed a reply to my daughter-in-law. I'm not available on Saturday, or for the foreseeable future. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. I sent it before I could talk myself into softening it. Then I opened Sophie's thread. She'd sent 3 more messages. Are you traveling by yourself? That is literally the coolest thing you've ever done, and I need you to know that. Also, Mom found out, and she's not calling it cool. I typed back, saving the story for when I see you in person. Don't tell them where I am, unless they ask directly. If they ask directly, tell them I said, I'm fine. She replied, got it. Also, I'm putting this in my journal, for history. That made me laugh in the dark next to the apricot tree, and it felt the way a window feels when you open it in April. Constance knocked on my door the next morning with 2 coffees and a folded map. I want to show you Chimayo, she said. If you have the day. I had the day. I had, for the first time in 6 years, more days than obligations, and I was only just beginning to understand what to do with that. The drive to Chimayo wound through hills that looked like they'd been arranged by hand. Small adobe buildings, chile ristras hanging from doorways, horses in fields that didn't seem to belong to any century in particular. Constance drove and narrated in that librarian way. She had thorough but never tedious, as if information were something she offered rather than dispensed. We stopped at the Santuario, the old church, with the small room in back where the floor was dirt and the walls were lined with crutches and photographs and handwritten prayers left by people who had needed something. Only the act of asking for it could begin to provide. I stood in that room for a long time. I'm not a particularly religious woman, but I understood, standing there, the human need to leave evidence of your struggle somewhere outside yourself. To say, this happened to me, and I came here anyway. I thought of all the things I had absorbed quietly over 6 years, the decisions made without me, the conversations held before I was in the room, so that by the time I arrived, things were already settled. The way my son spoke to me sometimes like I was a problem being managed rather than a person being consulted. And the way I had nodded and made coffee and told myself that this was what love looked like in its practical form. It wasn't. I knew that now. I had known it for years and not let myself finish the thought. That evening, back at the inn, I found a voicemail from my son. His voice had shifted, less efficient, less arranged. Mom, we're worried. The realtor says you haven't responded. I don't understand what's happening. Can you please just call me? A pause, then, quieter. I'm not trying to hurt you. I sat with that for a while. I believed him. That was the part I'd been carrying the longest. The fact that people can cause harm without intending it, can erase you without ever raising their voice, can love you in a way that leaves no room for you at all, and mean none of it, and still do it completely. I didn't call back. I wasn't ready to speak. I was still deciding what I wanted to say, and I had spent too many years saying things before they were finished because someone else's discomfort couldn't wait. Constance and I drove to Taos the next day. We ate green child cheeseburgers at a roadside place she'd discovered on her third trip through, and she told me about the first year she'd traveled alone, how she'd cried in the parking lot of a gas station in Nevada, and then ordered the largest coffee they sold and kept going. The crying doesn't mean stop, she said. It usually means you're close to something. I thought about that. In Taos, we walked the Pueblo, one of the oldest continuously inhabited places in North America. The walls were clay and ancient and indifferent to urgency, in a way that felt instructive. I bought a small pot from a woman who made them the way her grandmother had, coiled by hand, fired in the ground. She wrapped it in newspaper without being asked, which I appreciated. My daughter-in-law sent a text that evening, longer than her usual messages, and without her usual crispness. Eleanor, I know we haven't always been easy. I know the timing of this was, I know it wasn't how it should have been handled. Michael is struggling with how to talk to you. He loves you. I know that doesn't fix the folder on the table, but I wanted you to know we're not trying to push you out. We were trying to solve a problem, and we made it your problem, and I'm sorry. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down and looked out at the mountains going dark. She had gotten closer to the truth than my son had managed in 4 days of voicemails. That was worth something. Not everything, but something. Constance left for Portland 2 days later. We hugged at the parking lot of a gas station, which seemed fitting, and she pressed a piece of paper into my hand, her address, her email, a small drawing she'd done of the 2 of us at the Mesa Rim, laughing at something neither of us could remember. Come to Portland, she said. The roses are impossible in June. I've never been to Portland, I said. She smiled. I know. Alone again, I drove south. No plan. I stopped in Socorro at a diner where a woman named Darlene refilled my coffee 4 times and asked nothing, which was exactly right. I stayed one night in a small motel near the Bosque del Apache and woke up before dawn to find the marshes full of sandhill cranes lifting off in one long silver sound, thousands of wings at once, a noise that arrived in the chest before the ears understood it. Frank would have loved it. That was when I finally cried completely, not the quiet kind from the Mesa, the full kind that takes something specific to arrive and doesn't apologize once it does. I stood in the cold dark in my jacket and I cried for Frank, and for the 6 years since, and for all the times I had been useful when I wanted to be known, and present when I wanted to be asked, and patient when the patience was costing me something I couldn't name until now. When it passed, I felt lighter, not fixed, just lighter, the way a house feels after you open a window in a room that's been shut too long. I called Sophie that evening. She answered on the first ring, already quiet, like she'd been waiting. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about Constance, and the Mesa, and the cranes. I told her about Chimayo, and the room with the dirt floor. She listened the way she always had, fully, without filling the pauses. When I finished, she said, "You sound different." Different how? She thought about it. More like yourself, like the version of you from the photos in the hallway before Grandpa died. I didn't know what to say. "I'm going to come visit you," she said, "when you're back. Just us, okay?" "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes. Dad keeps reading the message you sent, Mom." He printed it. He keeps picking it up and putting it back down. I hadn't sent a long message. Just the one text about not being available. He's reading that? "I think it's the foreseeable future part," Sophie said carefully. "I don't think he's heard that word from you before." She was right. I had never offered my son the word no in any of its forms. Not no, not wait, not without asking me first. I had offered him availability, the way certain landlines offer a dial tone reliably, continuously, without ever being asked if the call was welcome. I let the silence sit between us on the phone. "Is he scared?" I asked. "Yeah," she said simply. "I think he finally is." I flew home on a Tuesday. Nobody was at the airport because nobody knew I was coming. I took a cab. The driver had the radio on low and didn't try to talk, which I was grateful for. The streets looked familiar the way things look familiar after you've been away long enough to see them. Just a little smaller, just a little less inevitable. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Vivian had watered the garden and left a handwritten note on the counter. Tomatoes are coming in. Stayed for the roses. The oak in the backyard was budding. The folder was still on the kitchen table because I had left it there and no one else had a key. I put the small pot from Taos on the windowsill. I hung the mesa painting above the chair in the study. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the folder, and I read every page. The doorbell rang at 7. I had called my son that afternoon not to explain myself, not to return any of the 18 things he'd said in the voicemails, but simply to say, "Come by at 7. Bring your wife. Don't bring the realtor." He looked like he hadn't slept well in a week. His wife stood half a step behind him, holding her own hands. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. They sat at the table. I poured tea without asking if they wanted it. Then I sat down across from them with the folder between us and I said, "I need you to listen to me the way you listened to that realtor. Completely. Without deciding in advance what I'm going to say." My son opened his mouth. "I'll go first," I said. And then I said the things I had been composing in the dark beside Frank's photograph, on the mesa, in the diner, in the cold air with the cranes. I told them that I understood they were trying to solve a problem. I told them that the problem they were solving was not theirs to solve. I told them that what they had presented as care was actually convenience, theirs dressed up in concern for mine. That handing me a folder with a timeline was not the same as sitting down and asking me what I wanted. That I had a name on a deed and a life in a house and 31 years of choosing this place every single day, and that none of that became negotiable simply because they found it easier to negotiate without me present. I told them I was not angry. I was finished. Finished being the person who received decisions rather than being invited into them. Finished making it easy to overlook me by never making it hard. When I was done, the kitchen was very quiet. My son put his hands flat on the table. He looked at the folder for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't think of it that way." "I know," I said. "That's what I needed you to hear." His wife reached across and put her hand over his. She looked at me with something I hadn't seen from her before. Not quite guilt, not quite apology. Closer to recognition. "We'd like to try again," she said. "From the beginning, without the folder." I looked at them both. They were afraid, which was new, and honest, which was newer. "Then put it away," I said. "We'll talk about the house when we're ready to actually talk about it. All three of us, at a table, like people." My son picked up the folder and held it in his lap, like something he wasn't sure what to do with anymore. "Good." Sophie came on Saturday, alone, bearing a container of cookies she'd made herself and a hand-drawn card that said on the outside, "To the woman who went to New Mexico without telling anyone," and on the inside, in her large, careful handwriting, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Actually, I want to be like you now." We sat on the back porch in the late afternoon light, the oak tree doing what it had always done, and she asked me everything about the cranes, about Constance, about the church in Chimayo and the pot and the painter who gave me directions on a receipt. I told her all of it. She listened the way she always did, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees, completely there. When I finished, she was quiet a moment. Then, "Did you know you were going to do it? Before you did it?" I thought about that, about standing in the kitchen with the folder on the table, about the key on the beaded cord, about Frank's photograph on the magazine page, 31 years unpinned. "I think I'd known for a while," I said. "I just needed the folder to make it official." She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a folded piece of paper. A list, in her handwriting, titled across the top, "Things I am not going to apologize for." I read it. My throat tightened halfway through. "I've been writing it since you left," she said. "You kind of started something." I folded it back along its creases and handed it to her carefully. "The way you return something that belongs to someone but that you want them to know you've read." "Keep going," I said. "Don't stop at one page." She smiled, wide and real. I wasn't planning to. The dinner with my son and his wife happened 3 weeks later at their house on a Sunday. Simple food, too many pauses, a conversation that moved like a river, newly rerouted, hesitant in places, finding its way. My son asked questions he had never asked before. What did I want the next 5 years to look like? Whether I had thought about traveling more. What I needed from them that I wasn't getting. He asked them badly, imprecisely, the way someone asks questions they've only recently realized they should have been asking. But he asked them. That was enough to begin. At the end of the night, he walked me to the car. He stood with his hands in his pockets and said, "I don't know how to fix this all at once." "You don't," I said. "That's not how it works." He nodded. He looked like the boy who'd set the hot pan on my kitchen table, and then looked up at me with that particular expression. Not quite sorry, not quite asking for anything, somewhere between the two. "One thing," I said. "Next time there's a decision that affects my life, I'm in the room when it's made. That's where we start." He said, "Okay." When I got home, I stood in the kitchen for a moment. The pot from Taos on the windowsill, the painting above the study chair, the oak tree in the dark outside. Everything in its place. But the place itself finally feeling like mine. Again, not by default, not by station, but by choice. I opened the notebook I'd bought at the airport gift shop in Albuquerque on my way home and wrote at the top of a new page, "Things I know now. People will take the space you leave them. Stop leaving it. A decision made without you is not a decision that belongs to you. Grief is not the same as disappearing. You are allowed to be both sad and present. The house is not the point. The point is whether anyone asks you what you want to do with your life before quietly arranging an alternative." I paused, tapped the pen against the paper. "You are not too old to begin. You are just new at insisting." I closed the notebook and left it on the table, not hidden, not put away. Right there in the open, where I could see it when I made my morning coffee, and remember, I had come back to the same house. But I had not come back the same woman. And that, I was beginning to understand, had been the point all along.